The prototype I spent 6 months perfecting lay in the trash can. Utter failure. Director Foster barked, smiling at our biggest client. My cheeks burned as my career collapsed before my eyes. I just nodded, fighting back tears. Then their lawyer cleared his throat. Who authorized voiding the IP clause in Section 12? Silence filled the conference room. His eyes found mine. You still have your original documentation, right? I never imagined my career at Vertex Innovations would culminate in that moment of public humiliation. 4 years of dedication, countless late nights, and a reputation for innovative thinking had led me to this pivotal project. My name is Enid Carson, 32 years old. And until recently, I was just another product developer swimming upstream in a corporate environment that rewarded political savvy over actual innovation. When Director James Foster first approached me about leading the Helix Global Medical Device Project, I genuinely believed my hard work had finally been recognized. Helix was our biggest potential client, and their contract would be worth millions. The challenge was developing a non-invasive monitoring device that could provide accurate readings through multiple tissue layers, something their previous vendors had failed to deliver. Your approach to the Patterson account impressed me, Foster said, leaning against my cubicle wall with calculated casualness. I think you have the technical creativity this project needs. His words filled me with both pride and hope. Despite being consistently overlooked for promotions, maybe this was my chance to finally prove my worth. Foster was known as a kingmaker at Vertex. His protégés inevitably climbed the corporate ladder. Getting his endorsement felt like winning the office lottery. The company allocated resources generously. I assembled a small team and threw myself completely into the work. My social life disappeared as weekends blurred into weekdays. My apartment became a secondary workspace with sketches and notes covering every surface. Even my mother commented on my dedication during our weekly calls. Sweetheart, I'm proud of you. But when was the last time you saw actual sunlight? She asked, concern evident in her voice. I'm fine, Mom, I assured her. This project could change everything for me at Vertex. Diana Walker, a senior engineer with 20 years of experience, became my unofficial mentor during this period. In her mid-40s, with salt and pepper hair always pulled into a practical bun, she had survived multiple reorganizations and knew the company better than anyone. Your design approach is genuinely innovative, she told me after reviewing my preliminary concepts. But in this company, good work isn't always enough. Document everything. Enid, keep records of all your contributions. I appreciated her advice but didn't fully understand its urgency then. I was too focused on the technical challenges, which were substantial. The device needed to be sensitive enough to detect minute changes in physiological markers while filtering out background noise, all in a package small enough to be practical for daily use. Mark Peterson, a 29-year-old software specialist on my team, developed an algorithm that helped solve one of our biggest hurdles. He was one of those rare colleagues who stayed above office politics, focusing purely on the quality of work. This calibration sequence is brilliant, I told him after testing his code. How did you account for the signal degradation? He shrugged modestly. I just built on your framework. The architecture you designed made the solution obvious. As weeks turned into months, the prototype evolved from concept to reality. Each component represented countless hours of problem-solving and refinement. I documented everything meticulously, partly due to my natural thoroughness and partly heeding Diana's advice. Every design decision, every test result, every modification was recorded with timestamps and rationales. Foster's interest in our progress intensified as we approached completion. He began stopping by the lab more frequently, asking detailed questions and requesting copies of our documentation for the executive briefings. His assistant, Paula Reynolds, a stern woman in her late 30s who functionally served as his gatekeeper, started scheduling twice-weekly update meetings. James is very excited about the direction of your work, she said with a tight smile that never reached her eyes. He's been presenting regular updates to the executive team. That should have been my first warning sign. Foster was increasingly positioning himself as the face of the project to upper management. Still, I was so focused on perfecting the prototype that I barely registered the subtle shift in dynamics. The night before we finalized the first functional prototype, I worked until 3 in the morning, testing and retesting every feature. When the device successfully completed the full diagnostic sequence without a single error, I actually cried from exhaustion and pride. 6 months of work had culminated in something that could genuinely help patients. Foster's reaction to the completed prototype seemed oddly subdued. "Good work, Enid," he said after my demonstration, his eyes calculating rather than impressed. "Let's schedule the client demo for next Thursday. That gives us a week to prepare presentation materials." As I compiled the final documentation for the client demonstration, I noticed something strange. Some of the technical specifications in the official presentation materials didn't match my records. Small changes had been made to power consumption metrics and sensitivity thresholds. These weren't merely formatting differences. They contradicted my actual test results. When I attempted to correct these discrepancies, I hit unexpected resistance. The document permissions had been changed, requiring Foster's approval for any modifications. That's when I first felt the cold whisper of doubt creep into my mind. Something wasn't right, but I couldn't yet see the full picture of what was happening right before my eyes. The discovery of altered specifications marked the beginning of a series of troubling incidents. When I emailed Foster about the documentation discrepancies, his response was dismissive. "Those adjustments reflect the executive team's standardized presentation format," he wrote. "Don't worry about the minor details. Focus on preparing for the demo." But these weren't minor details. They were fundamental aspects of how the device functioned. Why would anyone change accurate technical information? It made no sense unless someone was deliberately trying to create a paper trail that didn't match reality. The next day, I discovered my security access to certain project servers had been restricted. When I called IT support, they informed me that the change had been authorized by Foster himself. "But I'm the project lead," I protested to the apologetic IT specialist. "How am I supposed to prepare for the client demo without full access?" "I just implement the access protocols I'm given, Miss Carson," he replied uncomfortably. "You'll need to take it up with Director Foster." Foster was conveniently unavailable when I tried to meet with him, so I approached Diana instead, hoping her experience might shed light on what was happening. "Is it normal to have my access restricted right before a major client presentation?" I asked, trying to keep the growing anxiety out of my voice. Diana's expression grew serious as she closed her office door. "No, it's not normal. And the fact that it's happening to you now is concerning." She lowered her voice, though we were alone. "I've seen patterns like this before, Enid. Keep copies of everything. Your designs, your test results, your emails. Store them somewhere outside the company servers. You think someone's trying to undermine me?" The idea seemed paranoid, even as I said it. Diana chose her words carefully. "Let's just say Vertex has a history of projects changing hands in ways that aren't entirely transparent, especially high-profile projects right before they succeed." That afternoon, I overheard Foster on a phone call through his partially open office door as I walked past. "The design concept represents a completely new approach to the problem," he was saying enthusiastically. "Yes, I took a risk developing it this way, but I'm confident it will exceed their expectations." I froze mid-step, a sick feeling spreading through my stomach. He was talking about my design concept as if it were his own creation. The risk he mentioned was actually a controversial approach I had fought to pursue despite initial resistance from Foster himself. That evening, I stayed late, ostensibly to work on demo preparations, but actually to investigate further. With most of the office empty, I discovered that previous iterations of my design files had been altered in the central database. Small but significant changes had been made, creating a revisionist history of the project's development. Following Diana's advice, I began creating comprehensive backups of everything. I used my personal external hard drive to store copies of all original files, along with video documentation of the prototype functioning correctly during tests. I even printed key documents and stored them in a locked drawer at my apartment. As the client demo approached, Foster's behavior became increasingly erratic. He began criticizing minor details of the prototype that he had previously approved. "The casing finish is too matte," he complained during one pre-demo meeting. "It doesn't convey the precision engineering inside." The finish was selected specifically for its non-reflective properties in clinical settings, I explained, struggling to maintain my composure. "It's exactly what Helix requested in their requirements." Foster dismissed my explanation with a wave of his hand. "Requirements evolve. Trust me on this." I was also disturbed to learn that Foster had been excluding me from key meetings with other departments. Paula scheduled a meeting with marketing to discuss product positioning, but when I arrived, she seemed surprised to see me. "Oh, James didn't think you needed to attend this one," she said with false sweetness. "It's just preliminary market positioning talk. Nothing technical." The pressure mounted as the demo approached. I canceled a weekend trip with friends to Big Sur that had been planned for months, knowing I couldn't afford any distractions. "I'm really sorry, but this presentation could make or break my career," I explained to my disappointed friend Amber over the phone. "It's fine, but this is like the third time you've canceled plans for work," she sighed. "I hope they appreciate all your sacrificing." I worked through multiple nights that week, rehearsing every aspect of the presentation until I could deliver it flawlessly, even if woken from a deep sleep. Despite Foster's increasingly strange behavior, I remained focused on one goal: demonstrating that our prototype could solve Helix Global's needs better than any competitor. The night before the demo, I stayed at the office until almost midnight, triple-checking every component of the prototype. As I finally packed up to leave, feeling as prepared as humanly possible, I took the elevator down to the parking garage. The doors opened on the executive level, and I instinctively stepped back into the corner of the elevator as Foster walked in. Engrossed in conversation with Thomas Warren, Helix Global's legal counsel, and another man I recognized as their chief technology officer. "Dinner was excellent, James," Warren was saying. "We should wrap up the paperwork tomorrow after your presentation." Foster nodded confidently. "I think you'll find the solution exceeds your expectations. We've taken a completely novel approach." They fell silent when they noticed me, and the atmosphere in the elevator instantly became tense. Foster looked annoyed at my presence, while Warren gave me a curious glance. "Late night, Enid?" Foster asked with forced casualness. "Just final preparations for tomorrow," I replied, my mind racing. Why was Foster having private dinners with Helix executives the night before our presentation? And why wasn't I, the project lead, included? As I drove home, a disturbing theory began forming in my mind. But it seemed so extreme, so professionally suicidal, that I couldn't fully accept it. Surely even Foster wouldn't risk his reputation by doing what I was suspecting, would he? The morning of the demo arrived with gray skies and a steady drizzle that matched my growing sense of foreboding. I arrived at the office 2 hours early, dressed in my most professional navy blue suit, hair neatly styled, and prototype securely packed in its custom case. The conference room was immaculate, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a dramatic view of the city skyline. I methodically set up the demonstration station, checking each component and running through the test sequence one final time. The prototype performed flawlessly, just as it had during hundreds of previous tests. "You're ready," I told myself, taking a deep breath to calm the butterflies in my stomach. This was the moment I'd been working toward for 6 months. My chance to shine in front of both Vertex leadership and our most important potential client. By 9:30, the room began filling with executives from both companies. I recognized Helix Global's CEO Gregory Simmons, a tall man with silver hair and piercing blue eyes, along with their chief technology officer and Thomas Warren, the legal counsel I'd seen with Foster the previous night. From our side, Vertex's CEO, Allison Barnes, attended with several members of the executive team. Foster arrived last, making an entrance in a perfectly tailored suit, his confidence palpable as he worked the room, shaking hands and making introductions as if this were his personal event. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began once everyone was seated. "Today represents a significant milestone in our partnership with Helix Global. After months of intensive development, we're ready to present a solution to the monitoring challenge that has proven so difficult to solve." He gestured toward me with what appeared to be professional courtesy. "Enid Carson has been part of the development team and will walk us through the technical demonstration today." Part of the development team? I was the project lead, not some minor contributor. But before I could process this subtle demotion, Foster continued, "I should note that while we're confident in the core approach, there are still some technical hurdles to overcome, as with any innovation." This unexpected caveat sent a jolt of alarm through me. Why was he undermining confidence in the prototype before I'd even begun the demonstration? Our testing had shown no significant hurdles remaining. Nevertheless, I maintained my professional composure as I stood to present. "Thank you, Director Foster. Good morning, everyone. Today, I'm excited to demonstrate a new approach to non-invasive biomarker monitoring that addresses the specific challenges Helix Global has identified." I launched into my carefully prepared presentation, explaining the fundamental innovation in our approach and how it solved the problems previous attempts had encountered. As I spoke, I could see genuine interest from the Helix team, particularly their CTO, who leaned forward, asking thoughtful questions that demonstrated he understood the technical significance of what we'd accomplished. The key breakthrough was developing a sensor array that can distinguish between signal types without increasing power consumption or device size, I explained, activating the prototype to show real-time data collection. The device powered up normally, its display showing the initialization sequence. But when it reached the calibration phase, something strange happened. The screen flickered, numbers jumped erratically, and an error message appeared. My heart rate spiked. This error had never occurred in any of our testing. I quickly tried the backup initialization protocol, keeping my voice steady as I explained. Sometimes new environments require a secondary calibration sequence. Again, the device malfunctioned, showing errors that made no sense given its perfect performance just an hour earlier. A cold sweat broke out across my back as I tried a third approach, keenly aware of the shifting atmosphere in the room as executives exchanged glances. Foster cleared his throat dramatically. "I was afraid we might encounter these issues," he said with rehearsed concern. "This is exactly why I mentioned the remaining technical hurdles." "This isn't right," I said, my voice betraying my confusion. The prototype was functioning perfectly during all prior testing, including just before this meeting. Foster stepped forward, his expression a masterful blend of regret and authority. "Enid, I know you've worked hard, but we need to be honest with our partners. The approach has fundamental flaws that my team identified in our review." "My team? What review?" I stared at him in disbelief as he continued. "The sensor configuration creates interference patterns under real-world conditions that weren't apparent in controlled testing," he explained to the room, using technical language that sounded plausible but described problems our design specifically avoided. "That's not accurate," I interjected, struggling to maintain professionalism as my work was being misrepresented. "Our design specifically addresses cross-sensor interference through the proprietary algorithm we developed." Foster's smile tightened. "In theory, perhaps. But as we're seeing, theory and practical application can differ significantly." He turned to the client team. "I apologize for this demonstration. It appears the prototype is an utter failure." Before I could respond, Foster walked to my demonstration table, picked up the prototype that represented 6 months of my life's work, and dramatically dropped it into the trash can beside the podium. Fortunately, he continued without missing a beat. I anticipated these issues and directed a parallel development track as a contingency. The room fell silent as Foster signaled to Paula, who wheeled in another device on a small cart. It looked similar to my prototype, but with subtle differences in the casing design. This alternative approach solves the same challenges, but uses a completely different sensor architecture, Foster explained, powering up the device, which, unsurprisingly, worked perfectly. As Foster launched into a detailed technical explanation, I sat frozen in my chair, professional smile fixed on my face while internally I struggled with shock and disbelief. But through my emotional haze, something caught my attention. Foster was describing specific coding solutions and bug workarounds that were identical to the ones I had developed. Not similar, identical, including a unique approach to signal processing that I had documented only in my personal development notes. That's when the full reality hit me. Foster hadn't just undermined my presentation, he had stolen my work. The alternative prototype was functionally my design, with cosmetic modifications. Somehow, he had accessed my private development files, created a duplicate prototype, and deliberately sabotaged my device before the demonstration. I watched in stunned silence as the Helix team grew increasingly impressed with Foster's solution. Particularly disturbing was hearing him use my exact phrases and technical explanations as if they were his own, down to the analogies I had created to explain complex concepts. As you can see, Foster concluded triumphantly, this approach provides 98% accuracy under clinical conditions while maintaining the battery life and form factor requirements. The room erupted in appreciative comments and questions. Gregory Simmons, Helix's CEO, seemed particularly impressed. This is exactly what we've been looking for, James. I think we have the foundation for a very productive partnership. As the meeting shifted toward contract discussions, I remained silent, professionally nodding when appropriate, while my mind raced through the implications of what had just happened. My career at Vertex appeared to be effectively over. Who would believe that Foster, a respected director, had stolen my work and sabotaged my demonstration? Yet beneath the shock and humiliation, another emotion was beginning to surface. Determination. I knew what had happened, and I had the documentation to prove it. The question was, what would I do with that knowledge? After the meeting concluded with handshakes and congratulations for Foster, I quietly gathered my belongings and returned to my cubicle. Numb with shock, I stared at my computer screen, contemplating whether to draft a resignation letter. Several colleagues walked past, offering sympathetic glances but keeping their distance. No one wanted to be associated with such a public failure. Conference room B, 10 minutes. Diana whispered as she passed, discreetly dropping a sticky note on my desk with the same message. I nodded almost imperceptibly, grateful for this lifeline in my moment of professional devastation. As I waited for our meeting, I began clearing personal items from my desk, family photos, the small plant my mother had given me when I started at Vertex, the technical awards I'd earned over the years. If I was going to resign, best to do it cleanly. The small conference room was empty when I arrived. Diana entered moments later, closing the door firmly behind her. I saw what happened, she said without preamble. That wasn't a coincidence or a technical failure. You think Foster sabotaged my prototype? Even saying it aloud felt like stepping into conspiracy theory territory. Diana's eyes narrowed. I know he did. And it's not the first time something like this has happened. She explained that Foster had a pattern of appropriating innovations from team members, particularly when large contracts were at stake. There was Andrew from the biotech division 3 years ago, Stephanie in neural interfaces last year, and Jason in the imaging department just 6 months ago. All brilliant innovators who mysteriously failed at crucial moments, after which Foster swooped in with his solutions. "Why hasn't anyone exposed him?" I asked, anger beginning to replace my shock. Andrew tried. He was systematically discredited and eventually fired for performance issues. Stephanie quietly took a job with a competitor. Jason just quit. Diana leaned forward. Foster is politically connected within Vertex. He's careful to cover his tracks, and he knows exactly how much the company values the contracts he secures. "So I should just accept this?" My voice rose slightly before I caught myself. "No," Diana said firmly. "You should fight smart. Don't resign in a dramatic gesture. Don't make accusations without ironclad proof. Investigate, methodically." That evening, I canceled my plans and stayed late after most employees had left. Rather than acting on emotion, I began a systematic investigation. First, I reviewed all project files, documenting access logs and modification timestamps. The server records showed Foster had accessed my private development directory multiple times during unusual hours: 2 a.m. on a Sunday, 11 p.m. on holidays, times when no legitimate work reason would explain his presence in the system. I discovered that while my primary prototype had been discarded, the automatic backup system had retained copies of my original design files, despite someone's attempts to delete them. Comparing these with Foster's alternative solution revealed they were functionally identical, with only cosmetic differences and deliberately introduced inefficiencies in my version. The realization that Foster's betrayal had been methodically planned for months rather than an impulsive decision made my blood boil. This wasn't opportunism. It was premeditated theft on a scale that could affect my entire career. I needed expert advice, so I reached out to Jared, a former Vertex employee who now worked in technology law. We met at a coffee shop far from the office. "The IP clause in client contracts is critical," he explained after hearing my situation. "It determines who owns the intellectual property rights to any innovation developed during the project." "And if that clause were removed?" I asked, remembering Warren's question during the meeting. Jared's expression grew serious. "Then Vertex could lose ownership of the technology entirely. Or worse, both companies could claim ownership, leading to years of expensive litigation." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about my mother, who relied on me to help cover her medical expenses after her insurance had denied coverage for her specialized treatment. I needed this job and the stability it provided, but I couldn't let Foster steal my work and damage my professional reputation. Around 3 in the morning, I made a decision. I would gather comprehensive evidence, document everything methodically, and wait for the right strategic moment. Foster had won the first battle, but he had made a critical error. He'd left a paper trail. The next day, I created an evidence portfolio. I organized server logs showing access patterns, side-by-side comparisons of my original design with Foster's alternative, and timestamps proving the chronology of development. I included emails where I had documented key innovations that later appeared in Foster's presentation. Most damning was what I discovered when reviewing my copy of the Helix contract. The standard IP protection clause had indeed been voided, and the digital signature authorizing this change appeared to be mine. A signature I had never provided. Someone had forged my digital authentication to remove crucial intellectual property protections from a multi-million-dollar contract. This wasn't just unethical. It was potentially criminal. The question was, why? What would Foster gain by removing IP protections that would normally benefit Vertex? I took a personal day to visit the public library where I could use a computer not connected to company systems. There, I researched the legal implications of IP theft and contract tampering. The penalties were severe, including criminal charges depending on the circumstances. I also discovered something else. 3 patent applications filed in recent months under Foster's name that bore striking similarities to projects developed by the same employees Diana had mentioned. It appeared Foster wasn't just stealing credit. He was potentially building a personal patent portfolio using other people's innovations. That evening, Diana called me from a non-company phone. "There's a follow-up contract meeting tomorrow afternoon," she said without identifying herself. "Helix is bringing their full legal team, including Warren. Thought you should know." I thanked her for the information, my mind already formulating a strategy. This meeting represented both danger and opportunity. If I remained passive, Foster's version of events would become official record. But if I played this carefully, it might be my only chance to expose the truth. I spent that night organizing my evidence into a clear, irrefutable presentation. I transferred copies to a secure cloud account and a USB drive. I printed key documents and placed them in a sealed envelope. Then I rehearsed exactly what I would say if given the opportunity, knowing that my professional future hung in the balance of how I handled the next few hours. As dawn broke, I finally fell into an exhausted sleep, setting my alarm for just 3 hours later. When I woke, I dressed with particular care in my most professional outfit, applied my makeup with precision, and drove to the office with a strange calm that comes from absolute certainty about what must be done. The stakes couldn't be higher. My career, my reputation, my financial stability all hung in the balance, but something else drove me even more powerfully. The fundamental principle that truth and integrity must sometimes be defended, no matter the personal cost. The follow-up meeting was scheduled for 2 o'clock in the executive conference room. I arrived early, taking a seat at the far end of the table where I could observe everyone's reactions. Foster entered with Paula, laughing confidently about some shared joke, his demeanor that of a man who believed his success was already secured. He faltered momentarily upon seeing me, clearly not expecting my presence. "Enid, I didn't realize you'd be joining us today. I'm still officially the project lead," I replied with professional neutrality. "I thought my input might be valuable for contract finalization." Foster's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Of course. Though given yesterday's demonstration issues, we'll be focusing primarily on the alternative solution moving forward." The room gradually filled with executives from both companies. Allison Barnes, our CEO, nodded politely in my direction, though I detected a hint of discomfort in her expression. The Helix team arrived last, and I immediately noticed their expanded legal representation. Thomas Warren was accompanied by 2 additional attorneys, all carrying substantial document portfolios. Foster appeared momentarily thrown by this legal showing but quickly recovered, greeting them with practiced charm. "Thomas, I see you've brought reinforcements. I hope that doesn't signal complications in our partnership." Warren's expression remained professionally neutral. "Just standard procedure for contract finalization, James. We have a few questions about some contractual language that need clarification." The meeting began with standard updates and pleasantries. Foster recapped the successful demonstration of our innovative solution without acknowledging the earlier failed prototype. I maintained my composure, waiting and observing as the discussion progressed toward contract details. Warren cleared his throat during a pause in the conversation. "Before we proceed to signatures, we need to address Section 12 of the agreement, the intellectual property clause." The atmosphere in the room subtly shifted. Foster maintained his confident expression, but I noticed his right hand tense against his notebook. "Our legal team discovered during final review that the standard IP protection language has been voided in the current draft," Warren continued, sliding copies of the marked document across the table. "This is highly unusual for a development partnership of this nature." Allison Barnes frowned, accepting a copy. "Voided? That can't be right. Our standard contracts always include robust IP protections." "Nevertheless," Warren said, "this version shows the clause has been struck, with authorization apparently provided by—" He consulted his notes. "Enid Carson, project lead." All eyes turned to me. I felt my heart hammering against my ribs, but kept my expression composed. "Miss Carson, Warren addressed me directly. Did you authorize removing the intellectual property protections from this contract? Foster interjected before I could answer. There may have been some confusion during document preparation. Perhaps we should take this offline and clarify the appropriate language. Warren ignored him, his gaze remaining fixed on me. Miss Carson, did you authorize these changes? The room fell completely silent. I could feel Foster's threatening glare, silently warning me to comply with whatever narrative he planned to construct. Executives from both companies watched with expressions ranging from curiosity to concern. My career and reputation hung on how I answered this question. I took a deliberate breath, my decision already made. No, Mr. Warren, I did not authorize those changes. In fact, this is the first I'm hearing about any modification to the IP clause. Foster's face hardened. Enid, you signed off on the final contract draft last week. Perhaps you overlooked that section. That's not possible, I replied evenly. I've never signed any document modifying the IP clause, nor would I have authority to make such a significant contractual change. Warren leaned forward. You're saying your signature on this document is unauthorized? I'm saying it's forged, I stated clearly. And that's not the only irregularity I've discovered. Foster laughed dismissively. These are serious allegations, Enid. I understand yesterday's demonstration failure was disappointing, but this is hardly professional. I ignored him, addressing Warren and Barnes directly. Mr. Warren asked if I still have my original documentation. The answer is yes. I have complete records of the entire development process, including evidence that the prototype that failed yesterday was deliberately sabotaged and that Director Foster's alternative solution is actually my original design with cosmetic modifications. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Allison Barnes' expression shifted from confusion to alarm. These are extremely serious allegations, Miss Carson. I'm aware of that, I replied, which is why I've compiled comprehensive evidence supporting every claim. Warren exchanged glances with his legal team. Perhaps we should pause contract discussions until these matters are clarified. Foster's professional mask finally slipped, revealing momentary panic before he regained control. This is absurd. Enid is clearly attempting to deflect from her failed prototype by making outlandish accusations. If they're outlandish, you have nothing to worry about from an investigation, I countered. I have time-stamped backups of all original designs with proper digital signatures, video documentation of the working prototype before the demo, server logs showing unauthorized access to my files, and forensic evidence suggesting the prototype was intentionally sabotaged. I reached into my portfolio and withdrew a USB drive. Everything is documented here, including evidence that my digital signature was forged on contract amendments. Warren immediately recognized the legal implications. He turned to Barnes. In light of these allegations, Helix Global cannot proceed with contract finalization until ownership of the intellectual property is definitively established. Barnes nodded gravely. I understand completely. She looked between Foster and me, her expression unreadable. I think we need an executive session to discuss this matter privately. She turned to the Helix team. Would you excuse us for 30 minutes? As the Helix representatives filed out, Barnes pointed to Foster, then to me. You two stay. She then asked all other Vertex employees except our legal counsel to leave as well. Once the door closed, Foster immediately went on the offensive. Allison, this is clearly a case of a disgruntled employee trying to undermine a critical client relationship. Enid's prototype failed publicly, and now she's fabricating conspiracy theories to save face. Barnes held up her hand, silencing him. James, those are serious counter-allegations. Let's examine the evidence before drawing conclusions. She turned to me. Miss Carson, you claim to have proof of both IP theft and contract fraud. I need to see it immediately. Yes, ma'am. I connected the USB drive to the conference room computer and navigated to a folder containing my evidence. This first file shows the chronological development of the monitoring device, with my authenticated timestamps on each iteration. For the next 20 minutes, I methodically presented the evidence I had gathered. The server logs, showing Foster's late-night access to my directories. The side-by-side comparison of my original designs with his alternative solution, showing they were functionally identical. The digital forensics report I had commissioned at my own expense, showing evidence of tampering with my prototype before the demonstration. Most damning was the authentication log showing my digital signature had been applied to the contract amendment from a computer terminal in Foster's office at a time when I was demonstrably in a different building, as proven by security badge logs. As the evidence mounted, Foster's denials became increasingly desperate. This is all circumstantial and could easily be manipulated. Enid has technical skills and could have fabricated these logs. Barnes turned to our legal counsel. What's your assessment? The attorney looked troubled. The evidence regarding the forged signature is particularly concerning. If verified by an independent examiner, that alone would constitute serious misconduct. Foster's face had turned an alarming shade of red. This is absurd. I've brought millions in contracts to this company. Are you really going to take the word of a junior developer over mine? Evidence speaks for itself, James, Barnes replied coolly. And if Miss Carson's allegations prove true, you've exposed Vertex to significant legal liability. She turned to me. Thank you for bringing this forward, Miss Carson. We'll need to conduct a thorough investigation. As I left the conference room, legs shaking with adrenaline aftermath, I realized the most difficult step was behind me. I had spoken truth to power. Now I had to navigate the uncertain aftermath of that decision. The days following the confrontation unfolded in a blur of investigative meetings and formal statements. Vertex placed Foster on paid administrative leave pending investigation results, a move that sent shockwaves through the company. I was asked to continue working but was moved to a different floor, presumably to minimize contact between Foster and me. The formal investigation began with Vertex's internal audit team, who requested access to all my evidence. I provided copies while retaining the originals. Thomas Warren from Helix Global requested a separate meeting where I walked his team through the technical aspects of my prototype development. So the architecture that Foster presented as his alternative solution contains your proprietary signal processing algorithm? Warren confirmed, making careful notes. Yes, including a specific bug workaround that I developed and documented in my personal notes. There's no way he could have independently created the identical solution. Warren nodded thoughtfully. Helix Global takes intellectual property very seriously, Miss Carson. We have no interest in building our product line on stolen technology. Despite being officially advised to continue normal work activities, I found the atmosphere at Vertex increasingly tense. Colleagues divided into camps, some openly supportive, others pointedly avoiding me in the hallways. Paula Reynolds emerged as Foster's most vocal defender, spreading thinly veiled suggestions that I was attempting to take credit for Foster's work out of professional jealousy. Diana proved to be my strongest ally, publicly corroborating parts of my account in her interview with the investigation team. Foster has a documented pattern of taking credit for team innovations, she stated, providing specific examples from previous projects. Her courage broke the dam of silence. Mark Peterson came forward next, describing how Foster had removed his name from algorithm documentation. Then others began sharing similar experiences, creating a comprehensive picture of Foster's systematic behavior. One morning, I received an anonymous email from a company address. Foster has friends in executive positions. Your career at Vertex is over, regardless of the investigation outcome. Smart people know when to walk away. I forwarded it directly to the investigation team and HR, formally documenting the attempted intimidation. Whatever happened, I was determined to create a clear record of everything. 3 weeks into the investigation, I was called to an unexpected meeting with Allison Barnes and the head of the legal department, Jonathan Pierce. "We have an update on the investigation," Barnes began, her expression serious. "What we've found goes beyond your specific allegations against Foster." Pierce opened a folder. "We've discovered evidence that Foster has been selling proprietary Vertex technology to competitors for at least the past 2 years." I stared at them in shock. "Selling our technology? To whom?" "Multiple companies, through shell corporations that eventually trace back to Foster. He's received payments totaling over $2 million. Pierce slid several bank statements across the table. "Your case triggered a broader investigation that uncovered this pattern. The sabotage of your prototype and presentation wasn't just about taking credit," Barnes added. "Foster needed to control the narrative around the technology, because he was already in negotiations to sell a version of it to Helix's main competitor." The revelation stunned me. Foster's actions weren't merely about career advancement or credit. He was running a sophisticated scheme to monetize stolen intellectual property from multiple Vertex employees. "We've referred this matter to federal authorities," Pierce continued. "They'll be conducting their own investigation into potential wire fraud and economic espionage charges." "What about my prototype?" I asked, suddenly concerned about the future of my work. Barnes leaned forward. "That's partly why we wanted to speak with you today. Helix Global has expressed interest in the original design. Your design. They've requested you personally lead the implementation team. Despite everything that's happened, you've demonstrated exceptional technical skill and professional integrity," Pierce added. "Those are rare and valuable qualities." The next day, Foster was terminated with cause. The official announcement was carefully worded, but the entire company understood the seriousness of his misconduct. His supporters, including Paula, suddenly became scarce. I was asked to give a presentation to the executive team about my prototype design, this time without sabotage or interference. As I stood before the same people who had witnessed my humiliation weeks earlier, I felt a profound shift in how they perceived me. The technical questions were respectful and engaged. The atmosphere was collaborative rather than adversarial. When Thomas Warren from Helix Global called to discuss moving forward with my original design, he was direct about their interest. "We need someone who understands this technology intimately. Vertex has proposed you lead the implementation team, with appropriate recognition as the primary inventor. Would that interest you?" "Absolutely," I replied without hesitation. "But I want to ensure proper credit for everyone who contributed, including Mark Peterson, whose algorithm was crucial to the design." Warren's approval was immediate. "That kind of integrity is exactly why we want to work with you, Miss Carson." The new contract included full IP protection for Vertex while acknowledging me as lead inventor on the patent applications. The prototype that Foster had dramatically tossed in the trash was retrieved, restored, and became the foundation for the product that would eventually help thousands of patients. As work began on implementation, Vertex announced a complete restructuring of the department formerly led by Foster. Diana Walker was promoted to a senior leadership position, creating a more ethical culture that emphasized collaboration and proper attribution. The most unexpected outcome came 6 weeks later. After reviewing my work and how I had handled the crisis, Allison Barnes called me to her office. "We're creating a new innovation protection division," she explained. "Its purpose is to ensure that intellectual contributions are properly documented and credited, and to prevent the kind of situation you experienced. We'd like you to develop and lead it." The offer included a substantial promotion, increased compensation, and the authority to implement systemic changes. It wasn't just personal vindication, it was an opportunity to transform company culture to protect other innovators. "Your experience gives you unique insight," Barnes continued, "and your response to adversity demonstrated exactly the kind of leadership we need." As I considered her offer, I realized how far I had come from that devastating moment when my prototype landed in the trash can. The journey had been painful, but it had forced me to find courage and conviction I hadn't known I possessed. "I accept," I told her. On one condition. I want to implement a mentoring program specifically designed to help employees navigate the political aspects of innovation that technical training never covers. Barnes smiled. That's precisely why we want you in this role, Enid. You understand that protecting innovation isn't just about legal safeguards. It's about people. Your own path with both innovation and integrity. 1 year later, I stood in the same conference room where my prototype had been discarded, now addressing a team of developers working on the next generation of medical monitoring devices. The original design, my design, had successfully completed clinical trials and was moving into production. The key lesson from our first-generation device, I explained to the attentive group, was that innovative problem-solving often requires challenging conventional approaches, but documentation and transparency are equally important to technical breakthroughs. The transformation at Vertex over the past year had been remarkable. Under Diana's leadership, our technical divisions had adopted new collaborative practices that ensured proper attribution for innovations. My role leading the new Innovation Protection Division had allowed me to implement structural changes that made it virtually impossible for anyone to repeat Foster's actions. The mentoring program I'd established specifically paired experienced engineers like Diana with promising developers, teaching them not just technical skills, but how to navigate corporate environments while protecting their intellectual contributions. Mark Peterson had been promoted to lead software architect, his brilliant algorithm work finally receiving the recognition it deserved. We now worked as true partners rather than hierarchy-bound colleagues, each bringing different strengths to increasingly complex challenges. The federal investigation into Foster's activities had expanded dramatically. Authorities discovered he had been selling proprietary information from at least 3 different companies over a period of 7 years. He now faced multiple federal charges carrying potential prison sentences and millions in financial penalties. More personally satisfying was watching former employees he had victimized receive proper recognition for their innovations. Andrew, Stephanie, and Jason were all contacted as part of the investigation, and patent records were corrected to reflect their contributions. Helix Global had become our strongest partner. The monitoring device, now officially named the Carson-Peterson monitor, in patent filings, had given them a significant market advantage. Thomas Warren had personally ensured that the contract included unusually favorable royalty terms for Vertex as a gesture of appreciation for our transparency during the crisis. My mother's health had stabilized thanks to the specialized treatment I could now easily afford with my promotion. During our weekly calls, she no longer had to hear the stress and doubt in my voice. "I'm so proud of you, sweetheart," she told me during our last conversation. "Not just for the success, but for standing up for what's right, when it would have been easier to walk away." Her words echoed in my mind as I concluded my presentation to the development team. Innovation doesn't happen in isolation. It requires both creative thinking and ethical standards. Each of you brings unique perspectives that deserve recognition and protection. After the meeting, Allison Barnes approached me. "I've just come from the board meeting. They've approved the expansion of your division globally, with increased funding." "That's excellent news," I replied. "The international offices have unique challenges we need to address." She nodded. "The board was particularly impressed with how your changes have increased patent filings by 38%, while reducing internal attribution disputes to nearly 0. It turns out people innovate more freely when they know their work will be protected and recognized," I observed. As we walked toward the executive offices, Barnes added, "By the way, your nomination for the National Innovation Leadership Award has been accepted. The ceremony is next month in Washington." The award recognized not just technical achievement, but ethical leadership in innovation, external validation of the principles I had fought to uphold. That afternoon, I returned to my office to find a package waiting on my desk. Inside was a framed photograph of the original prototype, the one Foster had thrown away. alongside the production version now helping patients. A note from Diana read simply, "Never forget where we started." I placed the frame prominently on my wall, a reminder of both the darkest and brightest moments of my professional journey. The path had been far more difficult than I could have imagined when I first accepted the project. But the outcome had transformed not just my career but the culture of an entire company. Later that week, I led a workshop for new employees about innovation protection. As I shared my experience in general terms, I emphasized the core lesson I had learned through painful experience. Documentation is your strongest ally, I told them. But courage is equally important. Sometimes standing for truth means taking professional risks. Those moments define not just your career, but who you are. After the session, a young developer approached me. "Your story gives me hope," she said quietly. "In my previous company, my manager took credit for my algorithm. I didn't know how to fight back." "Did you keep records?" I asked. She nodded. "Everything. I just didn't know it mattered until it was too late." "It's never too late for integrity," I told her. "Let's talk about your experience in detail. There may be more we can do than you realize." As I scheduled time to help her document her case properly, I realized this was the most meaningful outcome of my ordeal, being able to help others navigate similar situations with knowledge I wished I'd had from the beginning. The journey from that devastating moment when my prototype hit the trash can to leading a division focused on protecting innovation had been unpredictable and difficult. But the transformation extended beyond my career advancement or even company policy changes. I had discovered a core of determination and principle within myself that no professional setback could diminish. 6 months later, I stood on a stage accepting the Innovation Leadership Award, the production version of my monitoring device displayed prominently beside me. As I looked out at the audience of industry leaders and policymakers, I thought about the broader implications of what had happened. Innovation thrives only when we protect both the technical process and the people behind it, I said in my acceptance speech. The most brilliant solution has no value if we sacrifice integrity to achieve it. The Carson-Peterson monitor was now helping thousands of patients manage chronic conditions with greater independence and dignity. The technological advancement was significant, but equally important was the ethical framework now embedded in our development process. Later that evening, at the award reception, Thomas Warren approached me with a warm handshake. "I never told you this, but I had suspicions about Foster's presentation from the beginning. Something felt off about his understanding of the technical details." "Why didn't you say anything?" I asked. "Corporate attorneys learn to be cautious," he admitted. "But when I asked about the IP clause and saw your reaction, I knew my instincts were right." He smiled. "Sometimes the right question at the right moment changes everything." His observations stayed with me as I returned to Vertex. In the months that followed, our Innovation Protection Division expanded internationally, implementing standardized practices that emphasized both recognition and legal protection for developers. The mentoring program became a model adopted by other technology companies, focusing on the human aspects of innovation that technical training typically ignored. I regularly shared my experience as a cautionary tale with new employees, emphasizing that documentation without courage was insufficient. Exactly 2 years after the prototype incident, I stood in a hospital ward watching a patient effortlessly use the monitor that had grown from my original design. The woman, managing a complex cardiac condition, demonstrated how the device had transformed her daily life. "Before this, I needed weekly clinic visits," she explained. "Now my doctor can monitor remotely, and I have freedom I haven't experienced in years." In that moment, seeing the real-world impact of work that had almost been stolen and discarded, I felt a profound sense of closure. The painful journey had led to an outcome far more meaningful than personal vindication. It had created systemic change that protected other innovators while helping patients live better lives. The story of how my boss trashed my prototype and I exposed his IP theft became more than a personal narrative of justice. It evolved into a case study taught in business ethics programs and a foundation for corporate policy reforms across our industry. Most importantly, it revealed a fundamental truth about innovation. Protecting the creative process is as crucial as the technical breakthrough itself. The value of an idea emerges not just from its ingenuity, but from the integrity of the system that nurtures and develops it. Have you ever faced a situation where someone took credit for your work? How did you respond? And what documentation did you have to support your case? Comment below with your experiences or questions about protecting your intellectual contributions in the workplace. If you found this story helpful, please like, subscribe, and share with others who might benefit from these lessons about professional integrity and documentation. Thank you for listening to my journey, and I hope it helps you navigate